Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I must say that I admire the forbearance of this august audience of U.S. state-level government officials, because you've heard so much about NAFTA and Canada in the past few days, and I know what Americans really think about Canada. Some of you may recall that the New York Times had a contest not so long ago to find the world's most boring headline. Does anybody know what the winning headline was? Worthwhile Canadian Initiative. The runner-up was Economist Dies. Paul Cellucci, a distinguished former member of this group when governor of Massachusetts, said on leaving his post after 5 years as ambassador to Canada that he finally understood the difference between Canadians and Americans. Canadians, he said, were unarmed Americans with health insurance. And this notion of deep familiarity and shared experiences spiced with subtle differences was wonderfully captured for me by this cartoon from The New Yorker, in which the man at the table says, "You seem familiar, yet somehow strange. Are you by any chance Canadian?" This notion of our similarities and our differences is the key theme underlying my talk today. Let me begin with what binds us together in the context of NAFTA. Here, the key message, if you take nothing else away from my talk, please remember this sentence. We are not a trading bloc, and NAFTA is not about trade. When you and I think about trade between countries, we think that each country is its own little self-contained economy. In that economy, the country's workers make goods and services, and those finished products are then sold to other countries who make different goods and services in their own little self-contained economy. Japan makes cars, France makes wine, and they trade wine for cars. This is most emphatically not what happens in North America. Because what we have here is not three countries and three economies trading finished products with each other. That's not what we have. What we have here is a single economy shared by two countries, that is to say Canada and the United States, and increasingly shared by a third, that is to say Mexico. So NAFTA is not, despite its name, it is not about trade. NAFTA is about production. Canadians and Americans do not trade with each other. It is quite incorrect and misleading to think of it in terms of trade. We make things together, and then we sell them to each other and the rest of the world. We are a production bloc. We are not a trading bloc. Let me make this very practical. Look at this rear wheel assembly used in North American auto production. As you can see, every part of this assembly has been flagged to show the country of origin of the various parts that are integrated into it. We cannot say, looking at this single rear wheel assembly, that there is an American or a Canadian auto industry. There is a North American auto industry. And the folly, for example, of Buy America is to think that you can help the people who work in the US flagged plants by hurting those who work in the Canadian flagged plants. The point is that we've gone way past that. Canadians and Americans make things together, and to hurt one is to hurt the other. The business community got this long ago. Let me show you what North America looks like from the point of view of business. Here's what it looks like from the point of view of electricity. Here's what it looks like from the point of view of oil production. Here's what it looks like from the point of view of pipelines. Here's what it looks like from the point of view of rail. And here's what it looks like in terms of truck travel. In each case, I defy you to spot the border in the business decisions that have shaped these maps. But of course, that doesn't mean that the border doesn't matter. And this is where you come in. Because the future of North American integration, as I have described it, is now being impeded chiefly by politics. And you have it in your power to make decisions to help or hinder what is to come. Let me be as practical as possible about this. Return to the car workers represented by this picture. In order to put together this assembly, parts had to be brought across the border in different directions and at different stages of production. The car industry says that a car produced in North America crosses the border 5 or 6 times in the course of production. I say that this picture suggests that that radically understates the number of times the border is crossed. For if you must take account of each part and where it comes from and where it enters the actual assembly. If, therefore, the border is thick and throws up obstacles to the quick and efficient movement of goods and people, our ability to be efficient producers, competitive against other trade blocks or production blocks around the world, and therefore our ability to be prosperous people is harmed. And by the way, it is in effect, if you have a thick border with obstacles to the easy movement of goods and people across it, it is in effect a heavy penalty we impose on ourselves, on domestic North American production compared to imports. A Japanese car made in Asia and exported to North America enters our territory once and is subject to border controls once, and those border controls do not disrupt the production process because the production process is over. We are importing a finished product. Our own production crosses the border innumerable times, and every inefficient or obstructive contact there at the border is in effect a tax that our international competitors do not pay. So, what do we encounter at the border? We encounter the great conundrum of a single continental economy that bears the burden of three national governments and political systems. The economic footprint and the political footprint do not match. The greatest obstacle to our economic success is our fragmented politics, and the next stage in the evolution of NAFTA is to find ways to make them match up as best we can. To do otherwise is to impose inefficiency on ourselves to the benefit of our competitors. And the place where that inefficiency is most glaring is at the border, because that is the place in space where the mismatch of our national and local policies becomes manifest. A practical example always helps, so I'll give you two. To symbolize our border infrastructure problem, let me talk about the Ambassador Bridge. The single greatest artery in the continental production relationship that I've been talking about. The Ambassador Bridge was built 82 years ago. This is what they were wearing and driving when it opened. This is what it looks like today. And that picture is pretty eloquent about why it has become a bottleneck, harming workers and communities on both sides of the border. Yet despite decades of effort, and the offer of Canada to pay a major share of the bridge's cost, namely about $550 million, to the state of Michigan, progress to build a third crossing to relieve congestion have been agonizingly slow. In fact, in this morning's National Post back home, this headline appeared: New Windsor-Detroit Bridge rejected by Michigan committee. I don't mean to pick on Michigan and the Ambassador Bridge. They're simply symbols. They're simply symbols of an institutional void created by national governments straddling a continental economy. I thought the example was particularly apt for this group because it underlines the extent to which decisions falling under your control and your influence are now every bit as powerful in helping or hindering this relationship as anything that Washington does. Because of our degree of because of our degree of economic integration, our relationship long ago left the rarefied atmosphere of international relations. The dance of diplomats is far too slow and stately. We are in this together, and we are building a relationship that is really without precedent in the modern world for its breadth and its depth. What comes after NAFTA is the effort of imagination to create institutions that can overcome the political divisions that scar our economic efforts while still preserving our national sovereignty. That's the challenge. And because the relationship has reached a level of complexity and integration that defies imagination, decisions that are crucial to its success or failure are now pushed down to a very large extent to local and regional levels. You matter every bit as much as Washington. And your decisions about border infrastructure affect the well-being of those workers in Kentucky, North Carolina, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Alabama, and Illinois who contributed parts to this assembly. Those are the locations of the plants symbolized by those American flags. Thinking that this is all Washington's job is an abdication of responsibility. Of course, that does not mean that Washington gets off the hook. On the contrary. And one of the consequences of the mismatch between our economic footprint and our political footprint is that the voices pressing politicians to action are necessarily more muted. Politicians respond to voters. When the voters are in another country, but are production partners with your own local workers, your own local success depends on workers on the other side of the border, then the political system has difficulty functioning effectively. And this, too, is the next frontier in NAFTA for those in this room. For you must add your voices to the call for our political institutions and our political decision makers to understand what business understood long ago, that the economic interests of Canada are not merely aligned, they are inextricably intertwined. Regional cross-border business organizations and state and provincial and municipal governments, including the people in this room, must provide a united set of demands to Washington and Ottawa to improve infrastructure and the border's operations. And in my view, this means moving as many controls away from the border as possible, using single instead of double reviews of goods and services and people crossing the border, collaborating on border infrastructure planning and construction, and creating a continental security perimeter. In other words, we can thin the border out between Canada and the United States if we can agree on standards to apply at the perimeter of North America to control goods and services and people coming in. We know that they meet standards that we've all agreed on, and we can be both safe and prosperous. I think you will agree that's a full program, and that's lots for you to do. My final point is that Washington is schizophrenic about who can and should run the border. At the moment, essentially, the cops are in charge. Everybody knows that cops are not subtle, and they think that security trumps everything, and that there is no price too high to pay for safety. And this is what you get when cops run the border. The alternative is that people who have a sensible approach to balancing security and prosperity have to be put in charge of the border. Now, there are signs of progress. America has gone through a devastating recession. You know it better than I do. Jobs have been slow to recover. President Obama got heartily smacked by the electorate in the midterms for failing to focus on the economy. And he's now trying to make up for lost time. At the February meeting of Obama and Prime Minister Stephen Harper in Washington, an announcement was made of negotiations to reduce the impediments to trade at the border. President Obama signed up for this chiefly because he now gets that a congested border is hurting North American prosperity. He isn't the only one who gets that. Today, New York Senator Chuck Schumer demands of senior U.S. border security bureaucrats in Senate committee hearings that they strive for pre-clearance of every truck crossing the Canada-U.S. border. In other words, this idea of moving the controls away from the border, pre-clearance within Canada and the United States so that they move seamlessly across the border. But in congressional testimony explaining why he couldn't accommodate Senator Schumer's request for more border openness, Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Alan Burson, contrasting the situations on the borders with Canada and Mexico, said that, quote, in terms of the terrorist threat, it's commonly accepted that the more significant threat comes from Canada. Really? Really? We should never forget. We should never forget, not only are Canadians and Americans in this together, in economic terms, we're also in this together in security terms. Integration has some surprising consequences. Consider, for example, that if the underwear bomber had succeeded, Northwest Flight 253 would have blown up over a heavily populated corridor running between London and Windsor, Ontario. The plane would have blown up over Canada. America has a right to expect that we be vigilant, but then it is also important to remember that it is in Canada's interest to be so. Not only are we hurt economically if we allow our territory to be used for nefarious plots against America, but our own safety and security are also thereby damaged. Instead of seeing us as a potential threat, to be kept at arm's length by a thickening border, far better that we work together to keep at bay those who would harm what we have so painstakingly built together in North America. Thank you.